Hi everyone, Ian here. I am mostly responsible for the monstrous size of the theory test. So it looks like I have some explaining to do. There were a bunch of questions where there were a very few correct answers across all of BC. So I wanted to do a little video to clear some of this knowledge up that you probably never had any opportunity to learn before. So first off, a little bit of theory about how sails are made. Now, I'm not a sail maker, but my general understanding is that you have these bulging, these convex shapes that get sewn together. And so if you sew two bulging shapes together, the extra fabric has to go somewhere, so it goes into depth. So you can actually sew depth into a sail by sewing two pieces that aren't straight together. And then they'd put the mast sleeve on afterwards if this is a laser sail, for example. That would be more of a Mark 1 sail. Now the lasers and radials are cut in a radial pattern, but the radial pieces aren't like pieces of a pie, they're bulgy. And then when you sew two bulgy pieces together, the depth has to go somewhere, and that goes inward. So first off, I want to make a shout out to Whistler Regatta for the first regatta prize that I've used as a teaching aid. So this sail is not has no depth sewn into it. It has stitches on it, but the stitches are just for show. So where there are stitches in a normal sail, there would be some extra depth. So the dynamics that I'm going to explain here would be more accentuated if there was actually depth sewn into the sail. But this is just a sheet of real sail material. And the thing that it does have in it that allows it to have a tiny bit of depth once it's on a mast is some Luff Curve. So before I get into what that is, I want to talk about the parts of the sail. So I think most of you know that this is the head of the sail, the top of the sail. If this sail is going that way, this would be the foot. This would be the luff where the mast goes, and this would be the leech. So head, foot, luff, leech. If the boat's going this way, I'm illustrating that with a leech telltale coming off the back corner there. And if you want to get fancy, this is the clue, where you put your clue strap in a laser, and this is the tack, the front. So I've mentioned laser a couple times, and there's a laser logo on this sail, but now forget lasers. Let's talk about 420s and skiffs and boats with two sails. Let's talk about their mainsails. So if you look straight down this sail, you can see that, to be very slightly realistic, they sewed a curve, or sorry, they cut a curve into the edge of the sail. So the second place, as well as sewing depth into the fabric, the second place that you can create depth in a sail is by putting a curved sail onto a straight mast. So this is, I don't know, a piece of wire I found in the garage. But at the moment, I've managed to bend it back straight, almost, pretty straight. So I'm going to jam it into the seam here. So I'm just sticking it into the seam, you can see there. When I put a curved sail onto a straight mast, if the mast stays fairly straight, you end up creating some depth. So you can see the depth in the sail there, created by having extra fabric, right? You have a bulge forced into a straight line, and that creates depth. So another word for that depth that probably came up in the test is draft. So that creates power. The more depth, the more you curve the wind, The more you redirect the wind, the more that momentum goes into pushing you forward. But basically, the more depth there is in the sail, the more power you produce. Now, prebend, totally nobody understands prebend, essentially, according to that test. I could be wrong. So prebend on a 470, for example, you don't usually have prebend in a 420 because the wire in the jib stays in the jib. But in a 470 and a 29er, you hook the jib onto a wire that stays up, the forestay. So you have the side stays and the forestay, and just with tension on those wires, before you even put sails up, you can tension down on that mast and create bend on the mast before the sail goes up. So that's prebend. So there is currently pretty much no prebend in this mast, if you can call it a mast. So let's create some prebend, get out our tension gauge, pin down, use our turnbuckle. So we've got some prebend in this mast now. Now I'm going to slip this pre-bent mast. So now you have more bend than the sail wants. I'm going to slip that back into the sleeve here. I might do that a couple times because it's pretty cool. And look, it is twisting the top of the sail off. Let's see if I can get a better visual there. So it's causing the leech of the sail, the back of the sail, to pivot outwards. I'll take it out here. Oh, no prebend. Prebend. So it's twisting the sail off. Now this sail has very little curve cut into it, just a hair. So if you matched the curve, the prebend, the curve of this wire to the curve of the sail, you would end up with a perfectly flat sail in this case. Or if, as you remember, you'd sewn some depth into the middle of the sail, you'd be left with only the depth the sailmaker put in there. So that's called matching your prebend to your luff curve. So luff curve is the curve of a sail that you just have randomly on the dock. So you can lay your sail out on the dock next time. Lasers and radials are great for this. I know that's not what we're talking about with double-handed boats, but it's quite obvious when you look down their sails. 420s are a bit different. They seem to go pretty straight, and then they kink at the power batten. They kink at the big top batten. And then when you put that kinked sail on a mast, you have a whole bunch of depth in the top of the sail, and all that depth goes into the power batten. All that draft is sort of set by the power batten. So if you are able to bend your mast, you can then twist power out of the top of the sail, or just reduce the overall amount of draft. So I'll try to get this. Oh yeah, maybe that's another thing I can show here. So I've got my pre-bent, ridiculous pre-bent wire here. Then I shove it into my sail. In the one perspective, it opens the leech. And then when I rotate it forwards, it really messes with the sail. You would never want pre-bend forwards. That's when your mast is about to break. But just to illustrate the point, it puts a ton of depth in the sail. That would be unusable because it's such a awkward, terrible shape. But it's sort of an exaggeration of what happens when you put a straight mast in a curved sail. So I'll try to summarize a little bit here, some of the terms that I've talked about. So the luff of the sail, the front of the sail, the leech of the sail, the back of the sail. Sometimes we come up with the term the fourth corner. So in this sail, there's very little roach, very little outward part of the sail there, but this is still a very important part of the sail. So this is called the fourth corner, even though it's not really a corner. In a roachy sail, a sail that goes out and then down, it's more obvious. We put a leech telltale there because it's really important whether that is hooked around or whether it's open. So luff leech, fourth corner, draft was the name for depth in the sail. At the bottom of the sail, if you pulled the outhaul tight, there'd be no draft. If you loosen the outhaul, there'd be a ton of draft. If you loosened it that much, that's obnoxious. So at some point, you'd have so much curve in the bottom of the sail if you had outhaul that it doesn't create power; it creates drag. So no power because it's flat. Little bit of power, more power, so much power that the wind can't even follow the sail. It just goes turbulent and creates drag. That wasn't really a summary, that was more of a segue. So prebend is what happens when you put a mast up and bend it before you put the sail up. Then other type of bend is what happens when, for example, you wrench on a Cunningham and the Cunningham pulls on the sail and bends the sail. So that happens a lot in boats with bendy masts. Club 420s have beefy masts and they aren't as effective at that. But you can still twist the leech off. Twist the leech off was when I put the mast in and it went like that. So that's like luffing the top of your sail while still using the bottom. But anyway, yeah. So there are some things that should help with a few of the points, and I'll maybe make another video about some of the other gaps in knowledge that I noticed after looking at some of the summaries from the theory test.